Welcome to The Bitter Witness.
Don't be scared.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Rebecca, and I'm your host for The Bitter Witness. I hope you've had a good week. We have just been blasted with our first huge snowstorm, and honestly, I'm over it. At this point in my life, I just don't get all warm and tingly with the first snowstorm. Now, I know some of you think it's wonderful and romantic and blah, 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 blah. But my old bones only hurt when that icy white shit starts falling. I had to go out and drive in it yesterday, and roads weren't plowed, and with the wind, you couldn't see 5 feet in front of the car. And my hands were in pain from white knuckling the steering wheel by the time I pulled in the driveway. So, personally, I would really like to look into human hibernation. See if that's an option. I think the animals who do that have the right idea. But anywho, that's about it from my little corner of Ontario. Let's get the business out of the way, shall we? If you like this episode or any episode, please head on over to the Patreon page and give the show some love. For less than a snow brush, you can help me to continue bringing you episodes each week. You can also support the show on Spotify, and don't forget to give the show a 5-star review over on Apple. Apparently, it really helps the show in the algorithm, which I don't know what that is. Like, follow, and share the show on whatever platform you're listening to. Stop by our Facebook or YouTube page and leave a comment or share a post with everyone you know or don't know for that matter. Everyone is welcome here. Send a suggestion for a future episode or just drop a line and say, "Hi, I'm listening" at thebitterwitness@gmail.com. That's enough of the business. Let's get to this week's case. The dogs are sleeping behind me, so puppy ASMR will be brought to you by both Miley and Piper this week. So grab a cup of tea and a box of Kleenex and sit back and relax as I tell you about the case of the school bus kidnapping. As always, I want to give the victims in the case top billing, but as in many of our cases, there are several victims. So, to all the victims and their loved ones affected in any way by this case, I acknowledge you and I send my love to you, wherever you may be. Children, truly the most precious and vulnerable treasures in our world. The consensus holds that only the most depraved individuals could ever conceive of inflicting harm upon a child. Unfortunately, this inherent preciousness is precisely what makes them ideal, albeit tragic, targets for those seeking malice or ransom. A dark reality marked historically by notorious crimes ranging from the heartbreaking abduction of the Lindbergh baby, the shocking case of Patty Hearst, to the harrowing kidnapping of Elizabeth Smart. However, even against the backdrop of America's most infamous kidnappings, few incidents match the scale and horror of the 1976 Chowchilla kidnapping, which stands as one of, if not the, most horrific mass abductions to ever take place on U.S. soil. A stark and unforgettable reminder of the profound darkness that can lurk unchecked and unfathomable in the minds of men. The dimensions of this truly terrifying case defy comprehension, raising chilling questions about the profound darkness that can reside within the human heart. Why would 3 young men desire to abduct 26 innocent children? And what twisted piece of their shared consciousness allowed them to conceive of such an evil, calculated plan? The sheer audacity and cruelty of this case will cause you to ponder the worst extremities of human behavior, a space we fear and none of us ever want to enter. Demanding answers where none seem possible. This harrowing event will undoubtedly serve as a visceral, unwanted lesson in caution, and will undoubtedly cause you to hold your child's hand just a little tighter when out in public. A stark reminder of the profound darkness and unimaginable horror that can lurk out there. We're going back to public school, people. Specifically, summer school. July 15th, 1976, in Chowchilla, California. 26 students, 19 girls and 7 boys, all from Derry Elementary School, were riding their bus home. They only had one more day of summer school, and then they were free. There's no feeling like the freedom of summer holidays when you're a kid. The ages of the kids ranged from 5 through 14, and Ed Ray, who was 55 at the time, was driving the bus. Ed loved his kids. He used to be a farmer, and when he retired, he decided to take up driving bus. And the kids loved Ed. He was one of those wonderful bus drivers. You know the ones. I had a horrific driver when we were in public school. I think the one I had has passed on now, but I can't remember if she has kids, so I won't name her, but she was awful. She was ridiculously short and used to drive the school bus with blocks of wood attached to the pedals so that she could reach them. I remember one time the bus's brakes went, and instead of getting a different bus, she drove the bus with no brakes. I'm serious. She was using the emergency brake to stop the bus. And if she didn't do that, she would just let the bus roll back and forth in a valley of a hill to let it stop. I clearly remember standing at the end of our laneway and watching her drift right by us, then back up all the way past us, and then come to a stop down the road. The next kid in my class that we picked up after my brothers and myself, his laneway was in the middle of 2 hills, and I remember she just let the bus roll back and forth until it stopped to pick him and his brother up. Then when we got to the school, she bumped into the back of another bus to stop her bus. And of course, this was back in the 80s, so not one parent thought there was anything wrong with that and just let us all climb on the bus with a wave and see you tonight. I remember Gavin Hunter sprayed her in the face with a big water gun as he got off the bus on the last day of grade 8. He did not like her at all, and she hated him too. And when he sprayed her, like, the entire bus cheered. We were absolutely horrible. But she was really mean. Anyway, that's my first tangent for today. And Ed was not like my bus driver at all, in any way. On July 15th, the kids had spent the day swimming at the fairgrounds, and these kids loved their summer school so much that, according to a CNN article, these kids had signed a petition asking the school to let their summer school last 2 more weeks. This must have been an amazing school, because if it was like my school, I don't know that I would have signed that petition. Ed was driving down a country road when he came upon a white van that was parked across the road, and it was almost blocking the entire road, but there was still a little bit of a space behind it. Ed was able to squeeze the school bus past the van, and as he was going past the van, Ed noticed that the hood was up, but he didn't see anyone in or around the van. And because Ed was a farmer and basically a saint, he stopped the bus and yelled out his little driver window, "Does anyone need any help?" Ed knew he couldn't get off the bus with all his kids on it, but he did have a radio, so he could have radioed back to the office and gotten someone to come out and help the people who were stranded on the road. Listen, I get it. Ed is trying to be a good person. And he was a good person, and this is a small town, and that's what small town people do. They help each other. But I don't recommend ever stopping to offer help if you see a vehicle on the side of the road, or more importantly, sitting across a road. If you want to be a good person, you can call for help from inside your car and open your window just a crack as you drive by and yell out, "I've called some help for you." Seriously, don't stop your car. As soon as Ed yelled out the window, 3 men with pantyhose pulled over their faces with sawed-off shotguns in their hands jumped onto the bus. Okay, no. At this point, when I was reading about this case, my mama bear instincts were firing. I was like, what the fuck? Why would you ever take over a loaded school bus full of kids and an old man driving? I doubt there's a lot of money or jewels for you to steal on that bus. Probably about 25 cents in pennies between the kids. For what end are you doing this, sirs? Oh my God, if I was Ed, I would have lost my mind. The 3 men came on the bus and forced Ed to move to the back of the bus. And they told all the kids, who, P.S., at this moment had no idea what was going on. One kid stood up, thinking this was some kind of a weird prank, and went, "Okay, you caught us, we did it." They had no idea. Many of the children started freaking out and crying. When the men screamed, "Shut up!" Ed did what he was told and went to the back of the bus, and he was trying to calm the kids down. One of the kids, Jennifer Brown Hyde, said in an interview later in life that Ed was speaking in a very stern voice, trying to get the kids to quiet down. And that wasn't like Ed, so they knew something was wrong. So let me tell you about these 3 little pricks. The 3 men wearing pantyhose on their heads were Fred Woods, 24 years old, James Schoenfeld, also 24, and James's younger brother, Richard Schoenfeld, who was 22. The 3 men were from extremely wealthy families, and Fred, according to reports, had a trust fund of over $100 million. So these boys were loaded. Fred, what the fuck? Why are you holding up a busload of children? Monica was the youngest child on the bus. She was 5. She asked one of the kidnappers if he was the Easter Bunny, because apparently with the pantyhose pulled over their heads, the legs were hanging down to the sides of their faces, and little angel Monica thought they looked like bunny rabbits. My heart. This poor baby thinks the Easter Bunny is on the bus with her, and here it's these 3 douches pointing sawed-off shotguns at them. Do you have any idea what a sawed-off shotgun could do to a tiny little 5-year-old girl? It would obliterate her. One of the kidnappers hopped into the driver's seat of the bus while the other two stood and pointed the guns at Ed and the kids. The one driving took off like a bat out of hell and drove the bus down the road and then did a sharp turn into a bamboo field. Meanwhile, all the kids and Ed are just hanging on for dear life. They were getting tossed around like little rag dolls. Once the kidnapper had driven the bus quite a ways inside the bamboo field, he backed the bus up to the back of another white van that was parked inside the bamboo field. The kidnappers made half of the kids jump from the inside of the bus to the inside of the van. They weren't allowed to touch the ground. This was so they wouldn't leave any footprints. Then another kidnapper drove the original white van that was parked in the middle of the road, and he backed that one up to the back of the bus. And then they made the rest of the kids and Ed jump from the bus into that van. One of the kids, Jody Heffington, who was 10 at the time, told 48 Hours, quote, "He held a shotgun to my stomach, and I had to stand there with this gun in my gut until that one van drove away and they backed the second van up. It felt like forever. I thought he was going to shoot me. I actually did." Unquote. The inside of both of these vans had been outfitted with wood paneling all along the sides and the back, and they had built a wall in between the front seats and the back of the van. So essentially, these kids and Ed were placed inside a wood-paneled box with no light and no air. And don't forget, we are in California in July, and according to a couple reports I saw, it was between 95 and 100 degrees outside, which is like 32 to 35 degrees Celsius. So you can just imagine how hot these babies are in the back of those vans. In one van, there were 12 children. In the other van, there were 14 children and Ed. They were literal jail cells. Jennifer, who I mentioned earlier, stated in an interview with 48 Hours about being in the back of one of these vans, quote, "I felt like I was an animal going to the slaughterhouse," unquote. I can't imagine the fear of these kids. And Ed, he knows he's responsible for them. My God. These three pieces of shit drove these babies and Ed around in the back of those white vans for, are you sitting down? 11 hours. 11 hours in complete darkness with no air, no water, no toilets. And it's 100 degrees outside. You can imagine what the temperature was inside. Throughout these hours, the kids were crying and screaming and peeing, and this whole time, Ed is in one of the vans trying to comfort the kids and telling them that everything would be okay. All right, Ed for knighthood, please. Here's a man who literally has the weight of the world on his shoulders, and he is trying to comfort the babies inside that van. He wouldn't have known if he was going to live or die or what the hell was going to happen. And instead of curling up into the fetal position like I would have, he is doing his absolute best. Meanwhile, while all this is happening, the parents of the 26 kids are now freaking out because their kids didn't come home and they hadn't heard anything from the school. So all these parents start calling the school and the police. But the school and the police had no answers. They didn't know where the van was. So the parents were kind of like, we're not just going to sit here and wait. So the parents ended up helping the police look for the bus. At first, everyone thought maybe there had been an accident or who knows, maybe Ed had had a heart attack or something and had to pull the bus over and all the kids were just stuck on the side of the road somewhere. law enforcement decided to call in the FBI to help with the search. Police, FBI, parents, and even all the townspeople came out to look for the bus. The principal of the school, Leroy Tatum, or Tatum, I'm not sure which and I apologize, stated in the Chicago Tribune that when he got the first phone call from a parent telling him that their child wasn't home from school, he thought that perhaps the old school bus had broken down. Quote, Ed often had to fix the bus himself from parts he'd buy at Emmett McDonald's Auto Supply, unquote. Tatum stated, quote, I went out and traced Ed's bus route. When I'd gone over the whole thing, east and west, I went back and went north and south. I called the county police and asked if they'd seen a yellow school bus floating around, unquote. Finally, after a few hours, they found the bus. It was spotted by a pilot conducting a search from the air. But, as we know, the bus is empty, and police found tire tracks that were driving away from the back of the bus. If one of my boys was on that bus and we found it empty with tire tracks driving away from it, I would vomit. I would literally vomit with anxiety and fear. Oh my gosh. My heart is beating like 1,000,000 miles an hour, and I know what happens. But you can't help but to put yourself in the place of these parents. Meanwhile, back in the vans, the situation with the kids was horrific. Kids were screaming and crying. Some had wet and soiled themselves, and some had started vomiting, most likely from the smell of feces and the dehydration. Ed and some of the older kids in each of the vans were doing their very best to calm the kids down and console them. Ed apparently was singing songs to the kids. He sang, "If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands," but he changed it to, "If you're sad and you know it, clap your hands," which initiated just giggles from the kids. So it was working. He was keeping those kids as calm as he possibly could. After almost 12 hours of driving, the vans took a quick turn and went off the road into what some of the survivors stated they thought was a field of some kind. As soon as they took this turn, all the kids started getting thrown around the back of the vans. Thankfully, no one was really hurt with all the bouncing and tossing around. And finally, the vans stopped. Then the back door of one of the vans opened and Ed was pulled violently from the van and the door shut immediately. Oh my God, can you imagine? The one adult who you have been relying on, clinging to through this whole ordeal was just yanked away from you. After a few minutes, the door would open again and the kidnappers would grab the child that was closest to the back door of the van and slam it shut. And this just kept happening over and over and over again. And slowly, one by one, all the children were being taken from the van. Some of the kids have stated that they thought that when someone was pulled out, they were just killed. They had literally no idea, and they were just terrified. When the kidnappers would pull a kid out of the van, one kidnapper would ask the kid their name, the second kidnapper would ask them their age, and the third kidnapper would ask them their address. Then the kidnappers would take a little piece of each child's clothing, and they would write all of this information down for each kid on the back of a Jack-in-the-Box burger wrapper. We don't have Jack-in-the-Boxes here in Canada. I wish we did. I'd love to try one. If I ever get to the States, I will try a Jack-in-the-Box. Michael Marshall, who was the oldest kid, he was 14, has stated in interviews that inside the van he was in, the younger kids were just clinging to him as one by one they were being pulled out of the van. Eventually, there was only Michael and the youngest child, Monica, left inside the van. Michael stated that Monica just had a death grip on him as the last child was taken from the van, and they were the only ones left. Then the door opened again, and the kidnapper tried to take Monica, but Michael was like, no fucking way. So he put himself in front of Monica and told the kidnapper to take him instead. Can you imagine this poor boy having to have that on his shoulders? Michael stated that he couldn't bear to let them take Monica, so he put himself in harm's way. And remember, at this point, Michael thinks that everyone who's been taken out of the van has been killed. So this 14-year-old baby was willing to sacrifice his life for a 5-year-old little girl. Michael stated that he literally had to pry and rip Monica's hands off of him when he was being taken out of the van. Oh my God, just think what you would do in a situation like this. I want you to actually think for just a minute. You're inside a blacked out van. You and a 5-year-old little baby who is clinging to you with a death grip believe that everyone else who has been taken out of that van has been killed. So you step in front of the 5-year-old, but by doing that and believing what you believe is going to happen to you, you now have left a little 5-year-old girl all alone inside that van. And she now has no one to help her or comfort her. Dude, this is the stuff of my nightmares. Once Michael was outside the van, he was asked the same questions as all the rest of the children and Ed, and they took a little piece of his clothing. But when Michael looked around, once his eyes acclimatized, he didn't see any of the other kids or Ed anywhere. Once the kidnappers had what they wanted from him, they led Michael over to what looked like a hole or a grave in the ground. This hole in the ground was actually an opening in the top of a moving van that measured 8 by 16 feet. The kidnappers had buried the moving van in the ground months before the kidnapping. Once Michael was close enough to the hole, the kidnappers told him to climb down the ladder into the deep hole. Once Michael was down the ladder, he was happily reunited with the rest of the children and Ed. Unbeknownst to Ed and the kids, the moving van was buried at the California Sand and Gravel Quarry near Livermore, California, which is over 100 miles away from Chowchilla. Inside this moving van, there were mattresses, water, peanut butter, bread, and cereal, but there wasn't enough food to sustain the kids and Ed for any length of time. There were 26 kids and 1 adult inside this moving van. And holes had been cut out of the tops of the wheel wells. Those were makeshift toilets for everybody. There was a ventilation pipe that looks like the kidnappers had rigged out of dryer vents. And these were attached to a fan that was running off of batteries on the top of the moving van. And something weird, when the kidnappers had taken Ed out of the van to place him in the hole, they had made him take off his pants. The only thing I can think of is it was some way to kind of keep control over Ed, demean him. Maybe they thought a man wasn't going to run off looking for help with no pants. That's literally the only thing I could think of. Once Monica climbed down the ladder into the buried moving van, The kidnappers pulled the ladder up out of the van and yelled down to the 26 kids and Ed, "We'll be back for you." And with that, they shut the top of the van, plunging the kids and Ed into darkness. Then the kidnappers placed a manhole cover over the flap they had cut out of the top of the moving van. That was the hole that the kids and Ed had climbed down into. After the manhole cover was in place, the kidnappers placed 2 huge tractor batteries on top of the manhole cover, just to make sure that no one could move the manhole cover and escape. Then these shit snakes buried the van. Articles I read had different opinions on how deep the top of the van was underground, but from everything I read, it was between 6 and 12 feet deep. Underground, the children and Ed could hear the kidnappers shoveling the dirt onto the top of the van. They have been buried alive. So we have to stop for a moment because I have a lump in my throat so big. I hate this case so much. I hate that it happened. I hate that these 3 shit snakes shared a brain long enough to come up with this plan. And I hate to say it, but it was a very well thought out plan. They thought of everything. Well, almost everything. At first, the kids inside the buried van were pretty calm as they were waiting for the kidnappers to come back. But then chaos started to set in. The batteries in the fans died, so what little air they were getting was pretty much gone. The food was gone quickly, and the smell from the makeshift toilets started making some of the kids sick to their stomach. The younger kids started to panic. Michael stated in an interview that everything would be quiet, and then one kid would start to cry, and they would all start to cry. He said it was just awful inside that buried van. And then the roof of the moving van started to buckle under the weight of 12 feet of dirt. Ed, Michael, and some of the other older boys decided that if they were going to die, they were going to die trying to escape. Together, they piled all the mattresses on top of each other, and Michael and Ed started to try and move the manhole cover that was sitting on top of the entrance hole. They spent hours trying to move this thing, but with the weight of the dirt on top of it, it was almost impossible to budge. Ed would later say that he was laying on his back, using his legs to try and move this thing. Michael and Ed were working so hard to try and get this manhole cover to budge that they had to pour water over their heads to get the sweat out of their eyes and so that they didn't die of heat exhaustion. Finally, after hours and hours of working on this thing, one of the kids down below screamed, "It's moving! I see it moving!" Finally, the manhole cover gave way. Once they got the manhole cover out of the way, it appeared that there was a giant box sitting over top of the hole. So Ed boosted Michael up inside this wooden box. Once there, all Michael could see was dirt. So Michael and Ed started taking turns digging. As they were digging, the other kids were cheering them on. Finally, after about an hour of digging through the earth, they saw sunlight. Oh, thank God. Meanwhile, back on the top side, there was a massive search going on for the kids and Ed. No one could figure out what had happened to them. A state trooper's wife was speaking with Ed's wife, Odessa. I love that name, Odessa, saying, quote, "We thought it was UFOs," unquote. Odessa stated directly after, "And it seemed like it had to be. No way it could be anything else. They were just gone. When the 3 kidnappers got home, they had tried to call the police station to give them their demands of ransom for the kids and Ed, but the phone lines were jammed from the parents calling about their missing children, so they couldn't get through. So what do you think they did? Well, let me tell you. They decided to have a nap. A nap. You know, they were exhausted from all the work they had done over the past 24 hours. This just shows the level of psychopathic traits that these 3 had. No remorse, no guilty feelings, no worrying about the kids and Ed that they had just buried alive. No, we're tired and we can't get through to the police, so let's catch up on some Z's. Bunch of shit snakes. I hate these guys. 28 hours after being kidnapped, Ed and the older boys managed to get all of the kids out of the moving van. But they had no clue where they were. So together, they started to walk out of the quarry, when suddenly they spotted a man working, Walter Ennis. As the group of kids and Ed staggered towards Walter, Walter started running towards the children. When he reached them, Ed said, "We're the ones from Chowchilla." And Walter replied, "I heard about it on the news while I was eating lunch." Then Ed said, "We were buried right out there," pointing to the other side of the quarry. And now tears are streaming down my face. If this was in a movie, this scene, I would literally be ugly crying right now. Like sobs and snot just pouring out of me. Oh, there's only a few movies that have the capability of getting me into that ugly crying state. One was Beaches, Old Yeller, and the other one was The Notebook. Oh my God, I can't even. I'm going to cry just thinking about it. Oh. Walter Ennis and his partner, Gerald Teague, took the kids and Ed and brought them inside one of the buildings in the quarry. They got them some water, and they got Ed a pair of coveralls and a Pepsi and called the police. Police came. Well, everyone came. Law enforcement took all of the kids and Ed back to the Santa Rita Rehabilitation Center, which, if I'm not mistaken, at the time was sort of an inpatient custodial facility, which was basically a jail. Kind of like a hospital jail, maybe? I'm not 100% sure. I couldn't find out what it was back then. There, the children and Ed were checked over by doctors and nurses, given some apples and sodas, and all were interviewed. Thankfully, no one was physically hurt. By this time, back in Chowchilla, the parents of the kids had been notified that the kids had been found, and those few parents who had left the police station hurried back to join those who hadn't. Back in Livermore, where the kids were being loaded onto a Greyhound bus along with Ed to be taken back to their families. Once they arrived at the Chowchilla station, the relief and tears were just overflowing. Kids were grabbed by their parents and pulled into giant bear hugs. Larry Park, who was only 6, was swept up by his mom. He looked at her and said, "Hi, Mom," and immediately fell asleep on her shoulder. Oh, the poor babies. I can't even imagine how hard those mamas and daddies are squeezing their babies right now. But let's look at the shit snakes. Fred Woods was from a ridiculously wealthy family, and the 2 Schoenfield brothers, James and Richard's father, was a very wealthy podiatrist. According to Julie Chiochetti, Richard's girlfriend at the time, the night of the kidnapping, Richard started feeling some remorse about the kidnapping and the burial of the children and Ed. And he ended up telling her that he was in on the kidnapping. Julie asked him where they were, and Richard said, "I can't tell you, but I have to be back there by 11:30 tonight." My thinking is he wasn't really having remorse about burying the children and Ed. I think he was worried about getting caught. And I think he figured that the batteries were going to die in the fans around 11:30. I don't think the concern was something from remorse. I think it was just, I don't want to go to jail for 27 counts of murder because I'll be given the death penalty because he's a coward. Police received a few leads regarding the identity of the kidnappers from the public, but those all fizzled out quite quickly. And the kids and Ed couldn't give a lot of information about the kidnappers. Most likely any information they did have inside their minds had been blocked by trauma. Although Ed was able to give the police a partial license plate number for one of the vans. Finally, on July 19th, police caught a break. Officers had been digging out the moving van buried in the quarry, and when they got far enough down, they could finally read the name on the side of the van. Palo Alto Moving and Storage. When police contacted the owner of the business, they were informed that the van had been sold for cash on November 20th, 1975, to Fred Woods. So 8 months prior to the kidnapping, Fred had bought that van. So that shows you how long those three asshats had been planning this kidnapping. Once law enforcement had Fred's name, they quickly realized that Fred was the son of the owner of the quarry. And when police searched Fred's home, they actually found a piece of paper with the title Plan on the top, and every move these shit snakes had decided to take. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Thank God for stupid criminals. Hey, Fred. Psst, Fred. If you're gonna try and pull off something like this, maybe don't use your real name when buying stuff. And second, don't leave the plans to the Batcave lying around with the title Plan on the very top line. Oh, and 3, don't bury your victims in your daddy's rock quarry, you dumb shit. On July 23rd, Richard turned himself into the police. His brother James had run, but not far enough, and he had tried to get into Canada twice, but both times he was turned back at the border. Fred, however, made it all the way to Vancouver, BC, but on July 29th, both James and Fred were arrested. James was found in Menlo Park, California, and Fred in Vancouver by the RCMP. All 3 kidnappers were up on numerous charges. Law enforcement believed that Fred was the brains of the operation and that Richard and James Schoenfield, the 2 brothers, were just dumbasses that followed Fred's lead. They were convicted and each sentenced to life in prison without parole. Man, I don't think I would ever be able to sit in that courtroom. I would jump on someone who buried my child alive. No bailiff or police officer in the world would be able to hold me back. This case just terrifies me. It makes me want to cry. God. According to law enforcement, Fred and James had purchased an old mansion somewhere in California and had to try to renovate it, but had run out of money. Fred didn't have access to his trust fund, so they needed to figure out a way to get a lot of money fast so they didn't lose everything they already had invested in this mansion renovation. As well, a few months before the kidnapping, there was a news story stating that the state of California had a $1 billion surplus. And these three geniuses figured if they could come up with a huge crime, they could force the state to give them $5 million. They figured that the state wouldn't miss $5 million out of a $1 billion surplus. They also figured that by taking a bunch of children, the state would pay the ransom right away. So all three were charged and convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Then, and you better pour a shot into your tea, people, on one of the dozens of appeals that were filed, the courts amended the sentences of all three kidnappers to life with the possibility of parole. Because according to the letter of the law, the kidnappers didn't commit quote-unquote bodily harm to any of the victims. Which now, I don't think they could make that argument, but back in the 70s, they could. Because technically, none of the kidnappers punched or kicked or shot any of the kids or Ed. So technically, it wasn't bodily harm. The 70s and 80s. They just starved, terrified, dehydrated, and traumatized the shit out of the kids and Ed. But yeah, no bodily harm. I can totally see that argument. Personally, I don't think these pieces of garbage should have gotten life with or without parole. I think these pieces of shit should have been thrown into a hole in the ground and left there to suffocate, just like what they did to those kids and Ed. That is just my opinion. There is one tiny silver lining that came out of this horrific crime, and that is the realization amongst psychologists and those in the mental health field that this kidnapping had in fact affected the kids' lives. Back in the 70s, experts believed that kids were just endlessly resilient, and that if everyone just went back to normal life, the kids would just get over it. In fact, one pediatrician stated to parents that only 1 out of 26 kids would possibly have any issues from the kidnapping. And naturally, none of the parents of the 26 kids wanted to admit that their kid was that one with issues. The discipline of childhood trauma psychology was literally just beginning, and diagnoses such as PTSD did not exist. But in fact, all the children were affected by the kidnapping, and many of the kids were affected well into their adulthood. For some, their self-esteem plummeted. Night terrors were prevalent in all the children. Others became paranoid and anxious at seeing strange vans. In fact, one of the kids shot a BB gun at a tourist whose car had broken down on his street. He was terrified that the car sitting on his street held a kidnapper who was going to take him away again. The parents were told by professionals that if their child was having a night terror, that they should just leave them alone in their rooms to work through it on their own, because by going in and comforting their kid, the parent would just be rewarding the kid's behavior and encouraging their child to have more night terrors. I'm sorry, but that is not how that works. Night terrors aren't something a person can control, and God forbid you should comfort your child and reinforce their safety, considering they've just lived through a kidnapping and been buried alive. If I had been on that bus as a kid, I would have been sleeping in the bed with my mom and dad every night. Sadly, there was no therapy offered to any of the victims. But in a feeble attempt at helping the kids get over the incident, a local organization, I think it was the Lions Club or something like that, paid for all the kids and Ed to go to Disneyland, figuring if the kids had fun for a few days in the most magical place on earth, they'd all come back and they'd be just fine. And this is why Generation X is the way we are. We were survivors and we had to figure out everything on our own. Many of the kids faced seemingly insurmountable obstacles when they reached adulthood. Many dealt with alcohol and drug addiction. Some dove into a rage-filled abyss, and others had reoccurring nightmares of their death. From all this, a researcher followed the Chowchilla kids for years, conducting a longitudinal study. That just means a study that goes on for years and years and years. The kids were interviewed at different times throughout their lives, and all that invaluable research helped with what we know today about childhood trauma and the long-lasting effect it has. As for the shit snakes, Richard Schoenfeld was released in 2012 after serving 36 years in prison. James Schoenfeld was released in 2015 after serving 39 years. And Fred Woods was released in 2022, serving 46 years. None of it was enough. As far as I can tell, all three of these shitbags are still alive and free. As far as I'm concerned, they don't deserve freedom. Ever. They buried babies alive and left them for dead. I'm going to read you what James Schoenfeld said to the Fresno Bee when he got out of prison. They asked him, "Why did you take the children?" I'm reading directly from the article, and the citation is in the show notes, so you can go read this for yourself. "I was no longer something special. I was not special at all. So I wanted to be. Have that feeling again. I wanted to fit in with these new people that we moved next to. And my friend's parents had twin Ferraris, his and hers with telephones in them. I had no money of my own. My dad lent me some money, and I bought a Jaguar. But I found out that the insurance was more than I made in a whole year, so 2 months later I had to sell the Jaguar. I was 19, I was working full-time as a busboy, and I was also going to college. I had envy issues trying to fit in with one crowd, and my other friends, they were getting married, they were buying houses, they were on their own career paths, and I was falling behind them, and I just figured I need money. Money would solve all my problems. I felt I couldn't earn my way out of problems. I had very low self-esteem because since high school, everything I tried I'd failed at. I couldn't even get a job as a salesperson. My dad couldn't accept failure or weakness, so I couldn't tell anybody in my family what was going on with me. Then the paper asks him, "How did you come up with the buried van idea?" The first place I picked was a barn. Fred's dad had 7 acres in Fremont that had a barn on it, but the barn was old and full of holes. You would have needed 4 people on each side to keep anyone from escaping. So I thought, how about a moving van? I just wanted something that everyone would fit into that they couldn't get out of. We thought that in a moving van, they could just cut through sheet metal walls and get out. Then the idea came to bury the van. If it was underground, they couldn't just cut through the walls and get out. We needed multiple victims to get multiple millions. We picked children because they're precious. The state would be willing to pay for them. And they don't fight back. They're vulnerable. They will mind. They will do what we tell them to do. I was a coward not to pick a different target. Do you smell that? That is a big old pile of snake shit bullshit right there. No, James, you were a coward because you couldn't do what everyone else does and just work for your fucking money and live within your means. And you're only calling yourself a coward now because you were caught. If you had have gotten away with this, do you honestly think you would be calling yourself a coward? No, you'd be strutting around like a peacock because you pulled off a successful crime and got $5 million. Oh, my daddy only gave me enough money to buy a Jaguar. My next door neighbors had Ferraris. I was just a busboy. You know what? Fuck you, James. And the horse you rode in on. Everybody else in the world has to work for what they have. And we all wish we could have money like what your parents had, what you had access to. But none of us do. None of us have access to that kind of money. Christ, I don't even have access to $500. You don't see me going out and kidnapping a bus full of children and burying them in the ground. No, you know what? You don't get to say that you had low self-esteem and that you were sad and all that other crap. You are a psychopath piece of shit. And you should never have been let out of jail. You had just as much to do with this plan as Fred or Richard. You all were equally responsible. I don't believe the shit that law enforcement said that Fred was the brains of the operation and you two were just dumbasses that just followed Fred's lead. I don't believe that. Not for 1 second. No way. You knew exactly what you were doing and you knew it was wrong and you participated anyway. And you had plenty of opportunity to stop it or to go get the police or to tell your parents or to get some help or, hey, I don't know, maybe not participate. No, you don't get off that easily and you should not have been let out after 39 years. You should have stayed in until your last breath. You, your brother, and Fred, all of you. My only hope is that Ed and the children were able to access some therapy or something that helped them find a way to work through the demons undoubtedly caused by these absolute pieces of slug shit. And that, my friends, is the case of the Chowchilla School Bus Kidnapping. My thoughts. This case is truly terrifying. It paints an unbearable picture of the fear, desperation, and utter helplessness those parents must have endured, not knowing where their children were. Equally chilling is the fact that the plan, despite its stupid mistakes, was a thoroughly thought-out scheme, a testament to the cold, calculating evil of the kidnappers. In my opinion, these shitbags should never have been let out of prison. Sadly, though, the penal system is, theoretically, designed for rehabilitation, though I doubt it had any real effect on these monsters. Even though these shit snakes are wrinkly, dried up old men now, I believe they still possess the capability to devise a diabolically evil scheme. Thank God they don't have the physical capability to carry it out. I can't tell you what I would do to someone who even looked at my children the wrong way. I would go to jail. I would go to jail because I would just lose my ever-loving shit. I would just go absolute demon mama bear on their ass. And I can't be the only one. I mean, every parent in that courtroom must have thought that. The roller coaster of emotions these three shitbags put people on is just unreal. This case is my absolute nightmare. Man, this case was awful. My heart, I have chest pains. It hurt so bad. It was just, you can't help but put yourself in the place of the parents and the kids inside that truck underground. And the strength and resilience that all these kids and Ed showed is just astronomical. I can't even imagine the harm and long-lasting trauma caused not only in the families of the victims and the victims themselves, but the entire town. Well, with that, I think we'll leave it there for this week. I'm going to go have a great big shot of something strong and call all my kids and tell them I love them. Stay safe, get your pap test done, and enjoy your day-to-day. This has been a Bitter Witness production.